Let's have a look at the circulatory system. So the circulatory system is basically everywhere that blood travels throughout your body. And the way that blood travels throughout your body is you have all these tubes. Is just the most simple way to explain it. And they're all connected to each other. And they basically take oxygenated blood and nutrients away from your heart out to your body and deliver all that. And they pick up all the waste and carbon dioxide and they bring it back to your heart so that you can send it over to your lungs and exhale it. So all these tubes, the ones that go away from your heart that carry all the oxygenated blood with nutrients are called arteries. And as those arteries get smaller and smaller, we call them arterioles. And then eventually, arterioles turn into what we call capillaries. And the capillaries are kind of like a net of tubes that lay over top of your cells so that the nutrients and oxygen can leave the blood and go into the cells, and so that the waste and carbon dioxide can leave the cells and come into the capillaries. And then those capillaries come together and get a little bit larger, and now they're headed back towards the heart. So now they're called venules and veins. So venules are the smallest veins, and they just get a little bit bigger as they connect to each other, and they eventually become veins. And the veins are the big things that come back to your heart. So we have two circuits of fluid moving around. We have the systemic circulation, which is going around the body. So that's kind of what I just described. We have that oxygenated blood leaving your heart, going out, delivering oxygen and nutrients to your body. And then deoxygenated or high carbon dioxide and the nutrients are gone, but it's full of waste. All that blood is coming back to your heart. And then we have the circulation going between your heart and your lungs. And so with that, we have that deoxygenated, waste-ridden blood going from your heart over to your lungs so that you can exhale out those waste products and carbon dioxide. And then we have your lungs putting oxygen into that blood, and that oxygenated blood is coming back to the heart. And then it can go into that systemic circulation where it can be pumped around the body. So that might be a little confusing, but we're going to look at that a couple different ways here, and hopefully one of them will click for you. So this picture, you looked at this when you were doing your group work. I don't think this picture is very helpful. You could wake me up in the middle of the night, and before I could even, open my eyes, I could tell you the flow of blood through the heart and through the body. But still, if I look at this image, it takes me a couple minutes to follow all these silly arrows and figure out where everything's going. So I don't think this is a very good image for you to study or memorize, just because it's too complicated, and our bodies are complicated. But I've tried to simplify it for you. So one way I like to think about it is just this list. And I'm going to ask you to tell me, what's the order of blood flow through the body and the lungs? And this is what I'm looking for. If you're a list person, this is probably what you're going to want to write down. If you're more of a visual person, I have another diagram on the next page, or on the next slide, that I think helps a lot. So, but this is one way to look at it. So blood comes into your right atrium. Your atrium is the entry into your heart. Then it goes to your right ventricle. That's also part of your heart, but the ventricle is the pump. So that's going to now pump the blood. It's going over to your lungs. For it to get to your lungs, it has to go through something. It's pulmonary, means having to do with the lungs. Arteries are going away from the heart. So it's going to go through your pulmonary artery over to your lungs. Once it's in your lungs, it's going to get rid of that carbon dioxide, pick up oxygen. Now it's going back towards your heart. Things that go towards your heart are your veins. So now that blood is in your pulmonary vein. We've already been through the right side of the heart, so now we're going to the left side of the heart. We're entering the heart. Atrium is entry, so we're going to go enter through the left atrium. Then it has to go to the left ventricle. That ventricle is the pump. The pump is going to pump that blood out into your body through your largest artery, which is your aorta. And then it branches off into all these other arteries and travels all through your body, drops off all those nutrients, drops off all that oxygen, picks up all the carbon dioxide. Now it's headed back to your heart. Remember, from the capillaries to the venules to the veins, and then all the veins come together into the two vena cava. So vena cava, I always joke and say it's probably Latin for big veins. It's definitely not, but I remember vena cava, to me sounds like big veins. So those are the big veins that come back into the right side of your heart. And this really should have another arrow that goes from here all the way back up, and it just keeps circling through. So another way to look at this, I like to think of it this way. So the blood enters the right side of your heart. Notice I have the right side of your heart as blue because that's deoxygenated blood coming in from your body. So I have blue to signify deoxygenated blood. Then that blood's going to go over. It's deoxygenated, so it needs to pick up oxygen. Where do we go shopping for oxygen? The lungs. So it's going to go over to the lungs. Then it's picked up the oxygen, ready to be pumped back to the body. So we have to go to the pump. Well, the pump is the heart. We've already used the right side of the heart. So now we're going to go to the left side of the heart. Okay. After the left side of the heart, it's got oxygen now. So it's getting pumped out to the whole body. Once it goes out to the body, drops off all the nutrients and oxygen, picks up all the waste and carbon dioxide, well, it has to come back up to the heart so that it can cycle back through. So real simply, it goes from the right side of your heart to your lungs, to the left side of your heart, to your body, and then right back up to the right side of your heart. Now we need to know it on a little bit deeper level. So let's go through again and add some detail. Well, how's it getting from your heart to your lungs? Well, it's having to do with the lungs, so pulmonary. Remember, anything going away from the heart is an artery. So this is pulmonary artery. Your pulmonary artery is one of the only arteries in the body that carries deoxygenated blood. Arteries are usually have oxygenated blood in them, but in this case, it's going away from the heart because it needs to go to the lungs to pick up oxygen. So it's a little bit backwards. Same thing with the pulmonary vein. It's going towards the heart, so it's a vein. But because it's it's carrying oxygenated blood, that sometimes confuses people. They're switched in this case. Pulmonary vein. Okay, and then from the left side of the heart, it has to get out to the body somehow. Well, the aorta is the biggest artery in the body. It's going to deliver all those nutrients and then come back through the veins and meet up in the biggest vein in the body, known as the vena cava. So the vena cava are going to bring it right back up to the right side of the heart. So so this is one layer deeper. We have the right side of the heart. We have the pulmonary artery to get over to the lungs. We have the pulmonary vein to get over to the left side of the heart. Then we travel through the aorta to get all over the body. And then we have the vena cava to get back up to the heart. But we're still not quite at enough detail. So we're going to add one more level of detail. Well, when it comes into the heart to the right side, what part does it come into? Well, it comes into the right atrium. What part does it leave through? The right ventricle. Same thing with the left side of the heart. It comes in through the left atrium and it leaves out through the left ventricle. So a way to help you remember that, atrium is entry. If I tell you, meet me at the atrium of Walmart, where would you meet me at? At the entry. Or the atrium of a college building. Atrium is the entry. So atrium is where blood enters the heart. And a ventricle is the pump, so that's the exit. So that should help you remember. So hopefully this diagram helps you kind of remember all these steps and help them make a little bit more sense. If this is like too much for you, you can always just go back and memorize this list. If this list is like just a bunch of jumbled words, then hopefully this all makes sense, right? So we have blood going from the, blood comes into the right atrium entry, goes out through the right ventricle. It's deoxygenated, so it's headed to the lungs. It's going away from the heart, so it's a pulmonary artery. Now it's in the lungs to pick up oxygen. Now we're going towards the heart, so we got pulmonary vein because it's going towards the heart. Okay, we've already been through the right side of the heart, so now we're in the left atrium for entry. Then we'll go through the left ventricle. Then we'll go through the aorta out to the body. And then after that blood goes all through the body, it's going to come back to the heart through the vena cava, right back up to that right atrium. Okay. So the heart is a hollow organ, and it's a muscle. It's about the size of a clenched fist, and it's made up of special tissue. Remember, it has special muscle tissue called cardiac muscle. It's two paired pumps so that the blood can pump out to the body or over to the lungs, depending on which side of the heart is pumping. We have the atrium are the upper chambers. The ventricle are the lower chambers. Okay. Circulation. So the heart, it has blood flowing through the middle of it, but the heart has to get a blood supply itself. And so that blood supply comes right off the aorta. You've probably heard of the coronary arteries before. Those are the ones that get clogged when people have heart attacks usually. But that blood comes right out of the aorta and circles right back to the heart itself to actually give that nutrient-rich blood right to the heart. This next part we already talked about. The right side of the heart gets deoxygenated blood from the veins, specifically the vena cava. The left side of the heart gets oxygenated blood from the lungs via the pulmonary veins. Okay. The heart rate. So the heart usually beats for an adult between 60 and 100 beats per minute at rest. So 60 to 100 is a normal heart rate for an adult. You can see I have these words underlined. You'll want to start learning these. They're not quite on the chapter 5 and 6 quiz yet, but good to start to get to know these. The amount of blood moved by one beat is called stroke volume. So when the heart squeezes, it pumps a certain amount of blood. That amount of blood moved is the stroke volume. No, we don't have a way to measure that in the field, but that's what it's called. Cardiac output is the amount of blood moved in 1 minute. So remember, going back to the respiratory system, minute volume is the amount of air moved in 1 minute. Tidal volume is the amount of air moved in one breath. So this is kind of similar. Stroke volume, the amount of blood moved by one beat. Cardiac output, the amount of blood moved in one whole minute. So if you wanted to calculate cardiac output, you would multiply heart rate times stroke volume. How many times did the heart beat per minute multiplied by how much blood was moved each time will tell us how much blood was moved in a minute. So the heart itself is an electrical conduction system that makes sure that all these cells work together to smoothly pump blood around the body. When the heart contracts, it just squeezes like this and pumps blood and just whoosh, pushes blood through the body. Arteries go away from the heart out to the body to all the tissues. Don't worry about all these different branches of the arteries. The largest artery is the aorta. Remember I said the coronary arteries come back up to the heart. You've probably heard of a lot of these. The carotid arteries run through the neck. So your carotid arteries through your neck. Hepatic, hepa means liver. So hepatic arteries are going to the liver. Renal means kidneys. So those are going to the kidney. Mesentery is what attaches your intestines to your body. So your mesenteric arteries go to your intestines. The pulmonary artery goes away from the heart to the lungs. So it's carrying deoxygenated or oxygen poor blood from the right side of the heart over to the lungs. We know those arteries get smaller and smaller until they become arterioles, and the arterioles eventually connect into those really tiny tubes called capillaries, where capillaries are laying over top of that tissue cells to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. Pulse. When you feel your pulse, either in your neck or in your wrist at your radial artery, what you're feeling, and see if you can find it on your wrist or your neck, what you're feeling each time is your heart pumping. Every time your heart pumps, blood goes whoosh, 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 all throughout all your arteries. So when you're feeling that pulse, what you're feeling is that whoosh of blood that was pushed by your heart. You'll notice your pulse feels stronger in your carotid arteries than it does in your radial artery in your hand, because your neck is a lot closer to your heart than your wrist is. It has to come all the way through your arm. Don't worry about learning all these arteries. The only ones we'll learn are the ones that we use to check a pulse. So I've already said 2 of them, radial in the wrist, carotid in the neck. There's only a couple more that we use. Don't worry about that for right now. Okay, capillaries. Remember, these are those smallest little tubes. It's where the arterioles come in and the venules go out. It's just where the blood can contact the cells, and oxygen can leave the blood and nutrients, and waste and carbon dioxide can leave the cells and come into the blood. So I love this picture. You have arteries coming in. They get smaller and smaller. They become arterioles. The arterioles get smaller and smaller until they become capillaries. Notice this blood coming in is red because it has oxygen and nutrients. Those all get dropped off into the tissues below here. Then the tissues also send carbon dioxide and waste into the blood, into the capillaries. So that's why the capillaries turn blue. And they come together and they become venules. The venules come together and they become veins. This vein eventually connects up with other veins and leads to the vena cava. So veins bring oxygen-depleted blood back to the heart, of course, except for the pulmonary vein, which brings oxygen-rich blood back to the heart. So veins are just things that come towards the heart. So we've been talking about the vena cava. There's 2 of them. The superior vena cava, superior means closer to the head. You'll learn that in chapter 5. So the superior vena cava brings blood from the head, neck, shoulders, and upper extremities to the right side of the heart, to the right atrium. And the inferior vena cava, inferior means closer to the feet. You'll learn in chapter 5. The inferior vena cava bring blood from the abdomen, the pelvis, and the lower extremities up to the right atrium. And they meet together there. The spleen filters blood. The spleen is in which quadrant is it? Do you know? It is the upper left quadrant of the abdomen. It basically, we're not going to talk that much about the spleen throughout the class. It filters blood, and it's literally a reservoir for extra blood. So if the spleen is lacerated or cut, there's going to be a lot of internal bleeding. That's basically all we know or care about the spleen. What is the blood made of? I am going to ask you this on the chapter 5 and 6 quiz. The blood has 4 parts: plasma, which is the liquid that everything flows in; red blood cells, don't worry about erythrocytes, that's a big fancy word. Red blood cells carry oxygen. White blood cells, don't worry about leukocytes. White blood cells fight infection. And platelets, which clump together to allow the blood to clot. So plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. Be able to list those 4 things on the quiz. What is blood pressure? You go to the doctor, they tell you your blood pressure is 120/80. What does that mean? Well, that pulse you're feeling, that's your blood pumping through your arteries. So your blood pressure is the amount of pressure that your blood is pushing against the walls of your arteries. And the reason you get 2 numbers, 120/80, the systole is the heart contracting. The diastole is the heart relaxing. So your systolic blood pressure is that top number. That's that 120. And that means that your blood is pushing against the walls of your arteries at 120 millimeters of mercury is the unit we use when your heart contracts. And then that over 80, that 80 means that your blood is pushing against the walls of your arteries at 80 millimeters of mercury when your heart relaxes. So at any point in time, your blood is pushing against the walls of your arteries between 80 and 120. 120 is the highest, 80 is the lowest when your heart's relaxing. So that's what a blood pressure is. Normal circulation in adults. So typically, our body adjusts to changes that need to be made. If you go and donate blood, your heart rate speeds up to circulate the remaining blood around your body so that all your organs and tissues get what they need. So this is a really important vocabulary word that we'll return to over and over and over. It's called perfusion. Perfusion just means the blood is circulating well enough that your cells are getting what they need. So the blood is circulating well enough so that your cells and tissues can get what they need. And that's the blood supply, including oxygen and nutrients and all that good stuff. Perfusion basically just means good blood flow. If you wanted to explain it, if you want to do a note card, perfusion on one side, good blood flow on the other. Inadequate circulation in adults. So if we lose a little bit of blood, our blood vessels constrict, our heart pumps faster. But if we lose a lot of blood, if you have an arterial bleed, you cut your leg with a chainsaw, you're going to lose a lot of blood, and your body can't make up for that. We can only adjust so much. We can only constrict so much, and our heart can only pump so fast. So if we can't adjust, we go into what's called shock. And we'll learn all about shock when we get to chapter 12. But for now, basically, it's inadequate perfusion. So what does our blood do? Well, perfusion. It delivers oxygen and nutrients to our tissues. It carries carbon dioxide and waste away from our tissues, and then our blood clots or coagulates if we have an opening in our artery or vein to control bleeding. That's pretty much it. I'll see you in the next section or next topic.